The email arrived just after lunch. Executive meeting, Gareth Voss, 2:00 p.m. I had no reason to expect anything unusual. These meetings were part of the rhythm of ArcLight budget reviews, operational updates, sometimes a new initiative to chase efficiency. Still, as I walked down the hall toward the corner office, I felt the stillness of the building. 17 years inside these walls, and I had never known them to feel so unfamiliar. The assistant ushered me in, and there he was, Gareth Voss. Barely 40. Sharp suit, sharper smile. The skyline of Seattle stretched behind him, cranes and glass towers rising higher each year, much like the company we had built from dust and long nights. He gestured to the chair across from him, his tone smooth, almost casual. "We're reducing your salary by 60%. Market realities. Nothing personal, no preamble, no discussion, just that." I felt the words fall into the silence like stones into deep water. My mind reached back across 17 years, the first winter in a freezing warehouse, where I stacked crates by hand, the nights I covered payroll with my own savings because missing it would have meant collapse. The drivers I recruited one by one from small towns, the funerals I attended for men who never made it back from the road. 60%. That was the value he placed on every hour, every scar, every sacrifice. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I closed the notebook I'd been carrying since my first day at ArcLight, its pages filled with notes and sketches of systems that had kept the company alive. I rose from the chair, slid the strap of my bag over my shoulder, and simply nodded. His eyes searched for anger, but there was none to give him. Not here, not now. I walked out. Each step measured, the glass walls reflecting a woman who appeared composed, almost indifferent. But behind that reflection, something older stirred a storm that had been waiting in silence for its time. By the time I reached my office, I already knew what had to come next. That night, as the city lights blinked through my apartment window, memories rose uninvited, carrying me back to the beginning. The warehouse had been little more than a drafty shell on the edge of Tacoma. Winter seeped through the corrugated metal, freezing our breath into small clouds. I hauled crates alongside the handful of drivers we could afford, though afford was generous. There were months when none of us saw paychecks. I kept us alive by draining my savings, telling myself it was temporary, that the company needed a heartbeat more than I needed a cushion. I remember the ache in my shoulders, the sting of frost-bitten fingers, the sound of forklifts echoing in the dark. We had no fancy software then, no optimized routes or sleek dashboards. It was paper ledgers and stubborn faith. When recruiting, I drove miles across Washington, knocking on doors, persuading small-town haulers to trust a company no one had heard of. I shook hands in diners, promised fair treatment, and sometimes sat with widows who had lost their husbands on the road, assuring them their families wouldn't be forgotten. It was ugly work, quiet work, the kind of foundation no investor ever sees. Through it all, my father's voice lingered in the back of my mind. Before he passed, he had taken my hand, his own skin like parchment. "Build something that lasts. Miranda, don't waste your years on sand." I carried that command like scripture. Every choice, every sacrifice bent toward that goal. And slowly, brick by brick, ArcLight rose. What began in a garage became a multi-million-dollar logistics firm with offices stretching beyond Seattle. People toasted our milestones with champagne, but I carried the dust and steel in my bones. And now, Gareth Voss. The new face in a corner office reduced it all to a line item on a spreadsheet. 60% less. 17 years into a footnote. I closed my eyes and let the anger settle into something colder, sharper. By the time morning came, I would know exactly what to do. I sat at my dining table long after midnight, the city humming faintly beyond the glass. A blank page glowed on my laptop screen, cursor blinking like a heartbeat. There was no hesitation, no pang of doubt. I had been preparing for this moment longer than I cared to admit. The resignation letter took only minutes, direct, professional, stripped of apology. I chose every word the way an engineer chooses bolts tight, unshakable. When I printed it, the paper felt heavier than it should have, like it carried the weight of 17 years pressed into a single page. From the desk drawer, I drew out the folder I had kept hidden under contracts and audit files. The label, handwritten in steady black ink, read North Star Plan. Inside were outlines, projections, a skeleton of something leaner, stronger, something built on the values ArcLight had abandoned, notes on partnerships, names of drivers who had whispered about wanting change, routes mapped across the Pacific Northwest. My father's words echoed again. Build something that lasts. I slid the folder into my bag, laid the letter on top, and closed the zipper with a quiet finality. Sleep didn't come, but dawn eventually did. At 9 sharp, I walked into Gareth Voss's office. He barely looked up from his screen as I placed my badge and the envelope on his desk. His eyes flicked over the letter. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. I figured you'd come to this. People like you don't last in this market. I held his gaze, unblinking. You'll understand soon enough. No raised voice, no flourish. Just that. I turned and walked out, my heels steady against the polished floor, the folder resting in my bag like a compass pointing me toward the only direction left. By the time I reached the elevator, I felt lighter, not empty, but focused, and as the doors slid shut, I knew my silence had spoken louder than anything I could have said. I had nearly reached the lobby when I heard her voice. Miranda Waite. Sabine Cho stepped out from the corridor, heels clicking too fast, a look of forced concern plastered across her face. She had been my protégé once, the junior analyst I'd pulled into late-night strategy sessions, the one I fought to promote when the board dismissed her as too young. I had taught her how to read contracts line by line, how to push back on vendors twice her size, how to steady her voice when the room tried to shake it. Now she tilted her head, lips pressed in an imitation of empathy. I just heard what happened. I'm so sorry. You deserved better. I nodded politely, unwilling to give her more. Something about her tone rang hollow, as though she were already rehearsing how she'd tell this story to others. Thank you, Sabine, I said, and kept moving. Her eyes lingered on my bag as though she knew more than she should. That night, over coffee with an old contact in compliance, the truth surfaced. Sabine had gone to Gareth days earlier, hinting that I had been preparing an exit strategy. She had framed it as loyalty, as vigilance, presenting herself as the watchful lieutenant ready to protect leadership from me. The betrayal didn't burn the way I expected. Instead, it settled into a cold certainty. I had once believed ArcLight could be a place where loyalty was repaid, where mentoring the next generation meant something. But Sabine's maneuver proved what Gareth's pay cut had already whispered inside those walls. Trust was just another currency to be traded. I thought back to the nights we worked side by side, her asking questions with a spark in her eye. I wondered if she had ever seen me as more than a stepping stone. The realization was strangely liberating. ArcLight no longer held any part of me, not my loyalty, not my faith, not my silence. By the next morning, as messages began lighting up my phone, I knew where my focus needed to shift. By midday, the silence I had carried out of ArcLight was already unraveling into noise. My phone buzzed first with a text from one of the warehouse supervisors. "Are you really gone? Tell me where you land. I'll follow." Minutes later came another, this time from a driver I hadn't spoken to in months. Heard what they did. You deserve better. Keep us in mind. By late afternoon, the calls began. Clients who had once routed everything through ArcLight now dialed me directly. Their voices low, urgent. Where did you go? Miranda, we need you on this contract. Some didn't bother to hide their frustration. We trusted the company because of you. Without you, we're reconsidering. I hadn't planned to respond. Not yet. Still, I listened, scribbling notes in the margins of a yellow pad. Each call, each message, was a reminder that the foundation of ArcLight wasn't in spreadsheets or glossy brochures. It was in relationships I had built. One handshake, one late-night troubleshooting session at a truck stop, one promise kept. That evening, as I brewed tea to calm the storm in my head, a new message lit up the screen. Clara Montrose. We had met once at a logistics roundtable in Portland. Her reputation preceding her an angel investor, known for spotting resilience where others saw risk. Her text was short, decisive. If you ever start something, I'm ready to back you. I sat with the phone in my hand, the words glowing like a spark against the dim light of the kitchen. Meanwhile, inside ArcLight, I knew the boardroom was boiling. A friend forwarded me a thread of panicked emails, partners threatening to pull contracts, executives scrambling for explanations. Gareth's response, cold and clipped. She was overpaid, irrelevant. We'll stabilize. But stabilization wasn't coming. My absence was louder than any speech I could have made, reverberating through hallways I no longer walked. As the phone lit up again, another client's name on the screen, I realized the silence I had chosen was no longer mine to keep. The diner was half empty, the kind of place where the coffee came strong and the waitresses knew your name if you came often enough. I hadn't been there in years, but it felt like the right spot, unremarkable. Safe. Elena Price slid into the booth first, her hair pulled back tight. Dark circles under her eyes betraying the weeks she'd been carrying ArcLight's chaos. Minutes later, Jonas Hale joined us, still in his work jacket, grease on his cuffs from another night in the warehouse. Neither wasted time on small talk. Elena leaned forward, voice steady. We're coming with you. Jonas nodded in agreement. I don't care what you call it, or where you set it up. If you're building something, I'm in. I stirred the coffee in front of me, watching the swirl of cream dissolve into dark. Part of me wanted to warn them, to remind them of mortgages, families, the uncertainty of stepping into a venture still held together by paper and hope. But I also knew the resolve in their voices. I had heard it before in drivers refusing to abandon routes in snowstorms, in dispatchers who stayed past midnight to reroute stranded trucks. I haven't launched anything yet, I said carefully. Elena gave a small smile. You will, and when you do, we're already there. Back at ArcLight, Gareth spun the news with the ease of a politician. In memos to the board, he called the resignations expected attrition, nothing more than turnover in a competitive market. But the cracks didn't wait long to show. A key client from Oregon refused to renew unless I was involved. Contracts that once seemed secure began to feel brittle. That evening, I signed a lease for a modest office space in West Seattle, a converted workshop. Its walls still smelled faintly of sawdust and oil. To anyone else, it was bare floors and flickering lights. To me, it was the first home of Horizon Logistics, the North Star plan stepping into daylight. And as I turned the key in the lock, I knew this was no longer just about leaving ArcLight. It was about building again. News travels fast in a company built on speed. By the end of the week, ArcLight's board had convened an emergency session. From what I later heard, the directors sat around the polished oak table, papers scattered, voices sharp. Why are our legacy clients asking for Miranda Keene by name when demanded? Why are they threatening to suspend contracts unless she's reinstated? Another flipped through a thick binder, stabbing at the figures. 70% of accounts 70 list her as the primary liaison. Did no one realize she was the face of this company? Silence followed. Gareth, I was told, shifted uncomfortably in his chair, muttering about market realities and overhead management. But no jargon could mask the truth I hadn't been an executive title to them. I had been the company's trust, its voice, its memory. Without that, Arclight was just steel and screens. While they argued uptown, my world was humming to life in a modest office in West Seattle. The lease papers were still warm, but already Elena and Jonas were unboxing chairs, tightening screws on desks, stringing cables across the floor. We had no nameplates, no glass walls, no catering. Just coffee and paper cups and the kind of energy I hadn't felt in years. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a notification, a wire transfer confirmed. Clara Montrose had delivered on her promise. The first seed round already in Horizon's account. The numbers weren't extravagant, but they were enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to hire. Enough to prove we could stand. I stood in the middle of the room, the hum of drills and laughter around me, and felt the air shift. Horizon Logistics was no longer ink on a folder labeled North Star Plan. It was desks being assembled, contracts waiting to be signed, futures being rewritten. Across town, the board debated losses and loyalty. Here, we built beginnings. And as the first Horizon logo printed from the borrowed office printer, still smudged with fresh ink, I knew we were stepping into more than survival. We were stepping into inevitability. The Fairmont's lounge gleamed with polished marble and hushed conversations, the kind of place chosen to signal control. Gareth sat waiting in a corner booth, his suit pressed to perfection, a glass of mineral water sweating beside him. He stood when I arrived, offering a smile that looked borrowed from a negotiation manual. "Miranda," he said smoothly, "let's be reasonable." I slid into the seat opposite, ordered coffee, and let him begin. He spoke of reinstating my salary in full, of adding a performance bonus, of granting what he called creative authority. Each word rolled off his tongue as if he were granting a gift rather than clawing back what had been taken. He leaned forward, hands clasped, rehearsed confidence in every movement. I listened, stirring sugar into my cup, watching the swirl until it disappeared. The irony was almost elegant. Weeks earlier, he had dismissed me as irrelevant, and now panic had driven him to dangle concessions he never would have imagined. When he finally paused, I set my cup down gently, the porcelain clicking against marble like a gavel. "You didn't cut my salary, Gareth," I said quietly. "You cut your future." His smile faltered. "Just for a second." Long enough. I rose, smoothed the edge of my jacket, and walked away. My heels struck the marble floor with steady rhythm, each step echoing louder than his entire speech. I didn't look back. That evening, as I sat in the glow of our barely furnished office, my phone lit up again. A journalist I vaguely remembered from industry panels sent a short message. "We hear you're launching something. Care to comment?" I typed one word and hit send. "Soon." The word hung on the screen like a promise. And as the hum of drills and laughter carried through the new office walls, I knew the echo from that hotel floor would reach far beyond marble. The morning sun stretched across West Seattle as I turned the corner to our little office. What I expected was a quiet start, maybe a few curious visitors, the scent of fresh paint still clinging to the walls. Instead, I stopped short. A line of people stood along the sidewalk, Jackets pulled close against the breeze. Some held flowers, others clutched folders thick with paperwork. At the front, a teenage boy held out an envelope, his hands trembling slightly. "My mom asked me to give you this," he said. Inside was a note, scrawled in hurried ink. "Thank you for helping her deliveries last year when no one else would." I swallowed hard, pocketing the note like a medal. One by one, clients stepped forward. Some I recognized instantly, voices from long conference calls, faces from years of handshakes in truck stops and trade fairs. Others were new, drawn not by contracts, but by whispers of how we worked, who we were. Each story was its own bridge crossing, proof that the silence I had chosen weeks ago had spoken louder than any speech could have. Behind them, familiar figures emerged quietly. A dispatcher who once spent nights rerouting stranded shipments, a mechanic who kept trucks alive with little more than grit and wire. They didn't announce themselves, just came in, shook my hand, and asked, "Where can I sit inside?" The office was crowded with half-assembled desks and the scent of ambition. Elena directed deliveries. Jonas checked the server racks, laughter spilling between the hammer strikes of makeshift carpentry. It wasn't polished, not yet, but it was alive in a way ArcLight hadn't been in years. I stood at the threshold, letting the energy wash over me. The bridge I had walked away on had not burned, it had stretched forward, carrying others across to something they already knew was theirs. And as the first Horizon contracts were signed on a table still sticky with fresh varnish, I knew the real beginning had only just arrived. Weeks blurred into a rhythm of long nights and early mornings, the kind of pace that would have exhausted me once, but now felt like oxygen. Horizon was no longer a name on a folder. It was contracts inked, routes mapped, and trucks rolling out before dawn. Every day, the office smelled less of paint and more of purpose. One crisp Tuesday morning, a headline landed across industry news feeds. ArcLight posts, unexpected quarterly losses. Client erosion cited. The number was staggering. 40% of their contracts had disappeared, many of them sitting now in neat stacks across my desk. By noon, the inevitable call came. The board chair's voice carried a tightness he tried to disguise. "Miranda, we'd like you to consider consulting for us, just to stabilize things." I let the silence stretch, listening to the faint tapping of my pen against a notepad. Then I answered evenly. "Tuesday, 2 p.m., nothing personal, just business." When the line clicked dead, I leaned back in my chair, eyes on the window. Outside, traffic wound its way through the streets, headlights flickering like restless signals. Then, almost on cue, a delivery truck rolled past, fresh white paint, the Horizon logo stenciled bold across its side. Our name, our beginning. A quiet smile rose before I could stop it. Not sharp, not triumphant, but steady. 17 years of sweat and sacrifice had built ArcLight, but those years had also built me. What Gareth and the board had tried to discard was never theirs to erase. I pressed my palm against the glass, watching the truck merge into the flow of traffic, carrying our future forward. The hum of conversation rose behind me as Elena and Jonas debated over schedules, their voices layered with optimism. Peace settled in my chest, deep and certain. The chapter of ArcLight had closed, but in its closing, it had opened a door wide enough for something greater. 17 years behind me, one beginning ahead, and this time, it was mine.